What is going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back here on Road Graders. And today we are going to be diving into what I think is one of the more interesting pieces of the Baltimore Ravens team building. I think it's a really good time to kind of put this under the microscope now that we are at the bye week. We've seen the way this season has played out so far. I think there's a lot of questions. And so let's get into it. This video, as always, is brought to you by our friends at Profit X. You can go over there, use promo code ROADGraders. You'll get up to $200 in Profit X cash back in your first 30 days. Thank you to Profit X for sponsoring. So when we take a look at the Baltimore Ravens team building, there's going to be a lot of discussion around some things that are entirely true. Things like, the lack of investment in the offensive line, things like the lack of a willingness to go out and trade assets to solve some of their key problems. So, for example, when a guy like Micah Parsons is on the trade block, go out there, spend the draft picks. Eric DeCosta has been a draft pick hoarder instead of using those for some high leverage trades in the past that would really push the team over the top. And two specific examples, one being Micah Parsons that just passed us in this offseason, but another key one being back in 2020 when the Ravens were trying to solve the wide receiver room, they didn't want to make that trade for Stephon Diggs. So I think all of those criticisms are valid, and I think all of them are very important, but I want to get a little bit more granular. I want to talk about what we're kind of seeing this year and what we've seen through some of the playoff year failures, and that is a lack of physicality, the lack of size in the postseason. And I think all of that has been a very underrated part of some of these draft classes that Eric DeCosta has brought in. And so one way to do that is to go back through the draft classes, take a look at the relative athletic score, and take a look at some of the composite size grades, because I think you start to uncover a little bit more about this specific option or this specific piece of the team building strategy. So if you look at relative athletic score, so I brought up Megatron because he's like your ultimate 10. He has basically 10s and everything. I think this is the highest rated relative athletic score athlete in NFL history. I don't think anybody ever exceeded him. Maybe Nick Emenwari when we just passed. But it's basically broken into four section. So you have your size, your speed, your explosion, and your agility. And all of these are compared to your peers. So every wide receiver that's drafted, they find, the average, and then based on what your metrics are, it's compared to that. So that's a way of just looking at relative athletes. So what was their size, their speed, their explosion, and their agility relative to all their peers? And, obviously you get some of these freaky athletes that come out with really high RAS scores. And, there's always a big delineation between, do you trust the athleticism when you go into the draft pick phase? And so what I did is I went back through the Baltimore Ravens draft classes, and I did it, as I think I started at 2019 on, because Ozzie Newsome kind of passed the baton to Eric DeCosta in 2018. Ozzie Newsome made that Lamar Jackson pick, so I wanted to look at DeCosta's draft picks and take a look, because it becomes really interesting really quickly when you take a look at the composite size score. So what I did just for the purpose of this exercise is each draft class will kind of take a look at the first four picks. I didn't go through every single pick because we'd be here all day scrolling through the slideshow. But you start in 2025, they go out, they get Starks, they get Green, they get Jones, they get Buchanan, 1, 2, 3, 4, first four picks, key pieces of this 2025 roster. Then you go into Malachi Starks. And this is another piece of this puzzle, is guys don't always do the full testing like they used to. So you're only going to get so much, but Starks went out relative to other safeties, tested really well with his speed, and didn't qualify for explosiveness, but in the metric he did do, which was his vert, was a little bit lower. But one of the key things here is when you look at his size score, came in at a 4.35 in terms of that relative for weight. And this is what really speaks to kind of what I'm getting at, is the Ravens have become highly athletic in terms of their speed, their explosiveness, their agility, but these size scores come in really low compared to their peers. You look at Mike Green. Mike Green obviously tested extremely well in his agility. He didn't run, but he would have probably tested pretty high. We can see what an explosive athlete he is, but 6'3", 251 among other defensive ends, you can see they're in the red. So his composite size score is poor. You look at Emory Jones, he came in 6'5", 315. This is with him as an offensive tackle. If you move that over to offensive guard, that 6'5" goes up into the green, but the 315 stays low. So still a lighter athlete. So you can see quickly as you go through this 2025 class, they test well athletically. Teddy Buchanan, another guy, great and explosion and speed, but only good in size, 6'2", 233. So this 2025 draft class really is a nice microcosm of what I think is one of the fundamental issues, and that's focusing too much on speed, explosiveness, agility, and not so much on size. I think that becomes a huge hindrance to this team when we get into the postseason. We've seen them get bullied numerous times, and now you're kind of seeing the culmination of the last few drafts, which is the core of this football team, and now they're getting pushed around this year. So I think it's an ongoing issue that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention. So let's go back to 2024. Same thing with Nate Wiggins. Tests extremely well. He's in the elite category for his speed, ran a 4.28, absolutely freaky. He's 6'1", which is great, but look at his weight, 173. So now you have Malachi Starks, who is very, skinny weight-wise. You got Nate Wiggins, skinny weight-wise. You see how you start to stack these pieces in the composite size score. Go to Roger Rosengarten. Again, all green throughout these other metrics. You look at his size, 6'5", 308. That's under, the 50% percentile amongst his peers. You go over to Adisa Isaac, green everywhere, except for his weight, 247. That's in the 21st percentile. It's crazy once you start to stack these up. Devontae Walker, who got a 991, and the only negative metric he had was his size, specifically the weight. So it just really shows how this team is stacked light, highly athletic, specifically in speed and agility, and in the, for most parts, explosion. But you can see the size differences amongst these draft picks. Go to Zay Flowers. I don't think this one's a surprise. 5'9", 182 is obviously going to come in low relative to other wide receivers, but very high level in the other metrics. You go to Trenton Simpson, again, a lot of greens, but comes in at 235, 6'2". So now you've gotten linebackers out of these most recent classes. Both of them are 235 pounds or lighter, and then you're struggling to attack those gaps. You add that into Roquan Smith, who's an undersized linebacker, and you quickly start to you basically have a bunch of guys that can run but aren't necessarily able to be physical enough. And this is kind of what my point is when you stack that lack of physicality, it creates a team that's going to lack physicality at the top point of attack. Tavius Robinson tests extremely well. 257 pounds. He's on the lighter side. I can't tell you the last time this team had a 270-pound defensive end. It's just not something that they look for anymore. You go back to 2022. Now, Kyle Hamilton's the exception. This kid's a freak. 6'4", 220 that moves like he does. He's almost on the opposite end of the spectrum where he didn't test well speed and agility-wise, but his size was outrageously good. And then you see the type of physicality that Kyle Hamilton brings to the field, and it makes you start to really wonder about this whole theory. Tyler Linderbaum, again, elite everywhere else except for his size. We knew that when he was coming out, 6'2", 296, one of the smallest centers to kind of come out recently. So not a surprise there, seeing him in that. David Ajabo, another guy that tests well everywhere else except for being 6'4", 250. Again, another guy, 250, just undersized edge players. Travis Jones did come in, tested well pretty much everywhere. So this isn't going to be a perfect science, but you can see there is a huge trend. Daniel Falele, obviously on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, where he tests elite in his size metrics, but very poorly literally everywhere else. So obviously some outliers as we do this. Isaiah Likely, another guy, had elite explosive score, but 6'4", 245, small among his tight end peers. You go back to 2021, Rashad Bateman, tests well speed-wise, 190 pounds. Again, there's that weight keeps popping out as being red on almost all of these high draft picks. Odafe Owe, elite everywhere except for his weight. It's kind of crazy when you look at it like this. I was a little shocked when I started going back through all these draft picks to really see the evidence start to pile up. Ben Cleveland, much like some of these other guys, just a bit of an outlier where he did test extremely well size-wise, as well as in the speed and explosiveness. Brandon Stevens, another guy, and I'm doing this for full transparency. Obviously, this isn't a perfect science, but tested extremely well size-wise. Go back to 2020, so we're almost back through all these draft classes. Patrick Queen, it has I can only find the Pittsburgh Steelers graphic, but again, green everywhere except for his size. J.K. Dobbins didn't test because he was hurt, but you can see 5'9", 209. He's in the smaller side of running backs. Justin, or it says Justin, he changed his name, obviously, once he became a Raven to Nnamdi Madubuike. Green everywhere except for size. It just kind of keeps stacking. You go back to 2019, Marquise Brown came out 5'9", 166, so very poor in terms of size. And it's crazy to think that they could have had DK Metcalf here, but obviously that's another discussion. You look at Jalen Ferguson, rest in peace to Jalen Ferguson. Yellow in most places, but that weight number for these defensive ends keeps popping up. So he's at 256. We haven't seen one defensive end over 260 pounds that's been drafted since Eric DaCosta took over. Miles Boykin was an outlier to this. He tested extremely well in almost every single category. And then Ben Powers being another offensive lineman that they brought in, 6'4", 307, not overly big relative to his peers. And that kind of summarizes every single draft pick that was one of their first 4 draft picks, going all the way back through Eric DaCosta's tenure as the Baltimore Ravens general manager. So the question is, what am I trying to get at here? So it just really becomes this unique trend that I've found with their draft picks, where they haven't prioritized throughout the draft with their highly drafted players, which is usually your highly skilled players, having size. And I think that when you stack that up over multiple drafts, and those drafts become the core of your team, which they are right now. If you go back through the 2019 to current, 2019 a little bit less so because a lot of those guys have moved on, but you can quickly see that that's the core of your team. All those guys I just went through are, seen as the Baltimore Ravens' best players. All of them tested extremely well athletically in terms of speed, agility, that sort of thing. All of them tested poorly in the size metric. I just found it a very interesting trend, and it really begs the question, is this part of why the Ravens are struggling with physicality? Does that answer some of the questions that we've had about why this team turns into pumpkins when the postseason comes around? Because it does become one of those things that creates larger problems. When you have your offensive and defensive line, they start to get pushed around a little bit. And it's like any sport. If you guys watch hockey, if you watch basketball, the physicality of those matchups, they just increase when the postseason starts. That's always been kind of that long-standing trend. And I'm starting to wonder if that's a huge reason why, if the core of your team and the draft strategy that you have is so focused on athleticism and building this track meet football team, but less so on the physicality side, is it going to result in you getting bullied? And now that's resulting in the 2025 Ravens getting bullied. I think it begs that question. So, it just becomes one of those interesting discussions that I thought wasn't getting enough attention. I certainly agree around the lack of emphasis on the offensive guard position. There's definitely different routes I would have went in the most recent years. Specifically, if you go back to the 2024 draft, when Adisa Isaac was picked, a guy like Mason McCormick being there, trading up for Dominic Puny, there were just so many opportunities to attack that offensive guard position. The reality is the Ravens just don't value that spot. They also don't value the edge rusher spot. They moneyball it as much as possible. They haven't gone out and made trades. And that, the trade aspect is obviously another big thing. We've hoarded draft picks rather than trying to package some of those draft picks to either move up for a higher impact player or to move them for a veteran. And, that really becomes a way to solve some of these long-standing issues. Maybe one of the best ways to solve your edge rusher issue is to go out and trade for one. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of pick your brains. I'd love to see your comments down below. Let's keep this conversation going. If you guys enjoyed this breakdown, if you guys see a lot of value in what I'm talking about, do me a favor, hit that like button for me, hit subscribe if you're new here. And and I'll focus on something Garnett just said. Quentin Miners, that stands out to me as one of the biggest draft misses that Eric DaCosta had, was going Ben Cleveland over Quinn Miners. And if you go back to that draft, because that was 2021, this was before they had a center, and Miners kind of came into the Senior Bowl as an interior offensive line option that wasn't just they didn't just need a guard at that time. They also needed a center because it was before they picked Tyler Linderbaum. And Miners came into that Senior Bowl and checked all those boxes, and they go with Ben Cleveland, who was, really big, really athletic, but you saw those flexibility limitations on tape clear as day. And then you hear the story of John Harbaugh being the one that's pounding the table for Ben Cleveland to be a pick. And I think it's one of the biggest misses they had. And as much as I love Tyler Linderbaum and I've enjoyed being able to watch him play, whether Miners is in here playing center or guard, it doesn't really matter. It changes what you're able to do the following year when you have 2 picks in the first round. Maybe they're able to go a different route, or maybe they just move Miners to guard, and then you have Linderbaum and Miners as the core of your interior offensive line. I think that paired with a Kevin Zeitler as a veteran, that's a pretty damn good interior to keep around for a few years, and then maybe 2023 looks a little different when they get into the postseason. So I think it's just a really interesting conversation to see how they've run this. I'm just kind of looking through some of the comments that are coming in here. Big shift was after 23. We went young and cheap on the offensive line. You're absolutely right. I think that was an underrated part. I was saying all offseason how I wanted to keep Kevin Zeitler around. And I know for a fact that he was willing to take less to stay in Baltimore. But they believed they had the depth. They believed they developed the guys. They thought they got cheeky enough with that Andrew Voorhees pick. They having him spend a year on IR while he recovered from that injury, that he'd be able to step in, and they thought that they had a backup option with Patrick McCarry, and that's kind of how it played out, right? They benched him. But the big thing is, with the offensive line, they leaned too heavily on what they thought they had in Daniel Faalele. And, this has been a huge talking point, but I mean, it's clear as day, especially with Todd Monken's offense, which is intended to be focused on the zone running game, that Daniel Faalele is just not a fit for that scheme. Like it's not. I don't even think it's a controversial opinion. It's an objective fact. Like, he does not fit that style of offense. Taking a look at another one. Unpopular opinion is that they draft players they can mold into their psychological preference and lowball and retain for longer periods of time. They don't like superstars. I don't know. Like, I do kind of wonder about that. But I don't know. Like, they have Lamar Jackson might be the biggest superstar in the NFL, or at least one of them. And they haven't had an issue trying, I feel like they let Lamar be Lamar. They don't try and change him. In fact, during his contract negotiations, they kind of let him do his thing. They didn't try and bash him publicly. They basically were like, we're going to go at Lamar's pace. Everything did go at Lamar's pace. They didn't get into kind of that, mudslinging that you sometimes see from teams when they're in-depth contract negotiations. So I don't know. I wonder about that a little bit. But I wouldn't say they don't like superstars. I think what they don't like is trading draft picks. Like, that seems to be a huge part. And we've heard Eric DeCosta talk about this. If you go watch the interview he did with UK Ravens last year, he talked about that. More picks, more shots. That's kind of been his modus operandi. And I think that's what he sticks to. He wants to have those draft picks so he can continue to take shots through the draft. Just checking here. I know probably 90% of the fans have checked out on this team, but I think we win the division and go on a run. As a franchise, they've weirdly done the best as a wildcard playoff team. I mean, for sure. And this team, once you get Lamar Jackson back into the fold, it's kind of why I've been a little bit more positive, is that at any point, Lamar Jackson can win a football game. He's just that type of quarterback. When you have a superstar like that, he can win you a football game. And, how much can, I guess the big difference with what I saw this year is the pass protection has just taken such a step back that, and again, it speaks to that offensive line being one of the fundamental flaws of this team. With the offensive line taking the step back that we've seen this year, where it really is that bad, Lamar Jackson can't be the same type of player. He doesn't want to be one of those improvised quarterbacks, right? He wants to be a pocket passer. And just like any pocket passer in the NFL, that you need to give them proper pass protection. It's not asking too much. It's asking the O-line to do their job. So we'll kind of put a pin in it there. I only wanted to go for 15, 20 minutes just to kind of talk about this, but I'll be interested to see what you guys have for feedback. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about this. Am I do I have the tinfoil hat on too much, or am I kind of onto something? Hit that like button if you guys are in here, and if you guys watch this video. And as always, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and thank you to Profit X for sponsoring this video.